I was supposed to be walking down the aisle today. Instead, my own private driver had shoved me into the trunk of my Lincoln Navigator, tossing a heavy wool blanket over my head to keep me hidden. I opened my mouth to scream, to demand an explanation, but his calloused hand clamped over my face with terrifying force. "Sir, please," he whispered, his voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. "Stay back. Don't make a sound. You need to see this. Just trust me." Minutes later, I was peering through a tiny gap in the tailgate. What I witnessed left me frozen in the dark. I realized then that the greatest threat to my family wasn't lurking outside the gates. It was already inside, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo and walking through my home like he owned the place. If you are a parent who has sacrificed everything to build a secure life for your children, take a deep breath. Hit that like button and let me know in the comments which state you are watching from. This story will make you look at everyone sitting at your dinner table with fresh eyes. My name is Richard Caldwell. I am 70 years old. For the past 40 years, I have built an empire in Dallas, Texas from nothing, commercial real estate and data centers. I've survived market crashes, ruthless competitors, and hostile takeovers. My wealth was built on suspicion and sharp instincts. I thought I had seen every shade of human greed and deception. I honestly believed that my success and my relentless work had made my family an impenetrable fortress. I couldn't have been more wrong. The darkness inside that trunk was absolute, broken only by a sliver of harsh Texas morning light cutting through the gap in the tailgate. The air was stifling, thick with the smell of expensive leather and a faint, metallic scent of machinery. My knees ached from being curled into my chest. Sitting beside me in that cramped, pitch-black space was Desmond. He is a retired Marine, my driver, my confidant, and my head of security for the last 15 years. Desmond is a man built like granite, someone who never shows fear. But as we huddled there like fugitives in the dark of my own vehicle, I could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven. I could feel the tension radiating off his stiff shoulders. His hand pressed firmly against my arm, a silent, desperate plea for me to remain still. We were parked in a hidden service alley at an expansive, high-tech estate in the hills of Austin. Inside the main house, catering crews were busy arranging thousands of imported white orchids. A string quartet was likely tuning their instruments in the foyer. Upstairs in the master suite, my only daughter, Victoria, was stepping into her designer wedding dress. She was moments away from marrying the man she believed was her soulmate. That man was Preston. He is 32, impeccably charming and deeply ambitious. He was my protege, my vice CFO. I had mentored him for years. I trusted him without reservation. I had handed him the keys to my business empire and the heart of my only child. I watched through the sliver in the tailgate as the heavy metal doors of the estate kitchen pushed open with a muffled thud. Heavy footsteps crunched on the loose gravel. I expected to see a delivery driver or a stressed catering manager. Instead, Preston walked into the alley. He was already wearing that crisp, black tuxedo, looking like he just stepped off the cover of a bridal magazine. His dark hair was perfectly styled. He checked his gold watch, glancing around the empty corridor with a sharp, calculating gaze I had never seen him use in front of my daughter or me. A moment later, another figure stepped out to join him. It was Harper. She was the high-end New York wedding planner Preston had insisted we hire. She was wearing a sharp black pantsuit, clutching a silver clipboard to her chest. To Victoria, Harper played the role of the ultimate best friend, coordinating every detail with a warm, reassuring smile. But here, in the shadows with my future son-in-law, there was no professional warmth. There was only a cold, predatory focus. I expected them to discuss the seating chart or the floral arrangements. I thought this was some last-minute crisis over champagne deliveries, but they weren't talking about flowers. Preston stepped closer, invading her personal space. He didn't look like a nervous, happy groom. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, black encrypted flash drive. He held it between his fingertips, the morning sun glinting off the sharp edges. Then, he pulled out a small, clear glass vial filled with a colorless liquid. Harper looked at the drive, then at the vial and locked eyes with Preston. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face. Then the unthinkable happened. Preston grabbed Harper by the waist and pulled her against him. She tossed the clipboard onto the gravel and wrapped her arms around his neck. They kissed. It wasn't a friendly peck, nor a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a passionate, greedy, intimately familiar embrace. It was the kiss of two people who had been sharing a life, and a very dark secret, for a long time. My stomach dropped. The oxygen in the car seemed to vanish. My brain raced, trying to process the horror unfolding just yards from my face. This was the man who had cried tears of joy in my study when Victoria accepted his proposal. This was the man who called me Dad, the man who sat in my boardroom nodding at every instruction. And now, an hour before the ceremony, he was deep in an embrace with the wedding planner. But the infidelity was just the surface. As they broke apart, Preston pressed the flash drive and the vial into Harper's hand. I strained to hear them over the low hum of a nearby generator. Their words were soft, but they were clear enough to freeze the blood in my veins. The medical proxy triggers the moment she says, "I do," Preston said, his voice laced with poison. Pour the contents of that vial into the old man's champagne flute before the toast. It reacts with the heart supplement I've had him taking. He'll go into cardiac arrest within 20 minutes. Natural causes, clean, untraceable. The biometric override is already loaded onto that drive. The second his heart stops, you initiate the scan. Transfer the 80 million from his blind, trust directly to the Cayman accounts. Harper laughed, sliding the items into her pocket. "Once this is over," she whispered, "we never have to look at his arrogant face again, or deal with his pathetic, clingy daughter." I didn't scream. I didn't kick the door open to confront them. The initial surge of parental rage crystallized into a cold, solid resolve. My survival instincts, honed by decades of corporate warfare, took over. In that suffocating darkness, I realized this lavish wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a digital Trojan horse. It was an execution chamber designed specifically for me. Everything strange that had happened over the last few months suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Moving the wedding to this remote estate, the dismissal of my longtime personal doctor, the new software systems Harper insisted on integrating. They weren't planning a life together. They were planning a heist, and they were clearing the only obstacle in their way: me. I looked at Desmond in the dark. He gave a slow, measured nod. We were at war, and my daughter was walking straight into the arms of a killer. Preston leaned against the brick wall, looking down at the drive. The second the digital marriage certificate is signed, the biometric override triggers, he said, his voice as casual as if he were discussing a routine corporate merger. I've spent 6 months mapping his digital signature. The moment the efficient hits submit on that tablet, the digital proxy agreement opens the floodgates. That transfers the entire 150 million from his blind trust through shell companies into the Cayman accounts. It happens in under 4 seconds. He won't even have time to blink before his entire empire belongs to us. I stared through the gap, my vision blurring at the edges. 150 million. That wasn't just money. That was 40 years of my blood, sweat, and ruthless sacrifice. That was a legacy built from a rented warehouse in South Dallas into a nationwide logistics and real estate giant. I had missed Victoria's piano recitals to close the deals that built that trust. I had sacrificed my youth to ensure my family would never know the sting of poverty. And this arrogant parasite in a custom suit was planning to wipe it all away with a stolen digital thumbprint and a fake smile. Harper ran a manicured nail along the edge of the glass vial, a dark, excited expression crossing her face. "And the toast?" she asked. "Are you absolutely sure about the timing? I don't want him falling over during the vows. It would ruin the aesthetic of the live stream." Preston chuckled, a low, genuinely amused sound that made my stomach churn. It was the same laugh I'd heard at the country club when he asked for my daughter's hand, when he sat at my dinner table, eating food my success had paid for. "Don't worry about the aesthetic," Preston said with a smug smile. "The timing is perfect. The champagne will be served 10 minutes after the ceremony ends. I ordered that specific vintage because of its high acidity and alcohol content. When that reacts with the supplement he's been taking for the past 2 months, it triggers an immediate, catastrophic chemical reaction." He paused to straighten his silk tie with a sickeningly calm demeanor. "I feed him that compound every morning in the name of wellness. It's been slowly weakening his arterial walls. He already thinks he's just getting older and tired. When the alcohol hits his bloodstream, he'll experience massive heart failure within 20 minutes. Natural causes. Absolutely clean, completely untraceable. By the time the paramedics get to this remote estate, it'll be too late. He'll be gone, we'll be married, and the money will be ours." Those words hung in the warm morning air, heavy and lethal. 20 minutes to cardiac arrest. Natural causes. Untraceable. I suddenly felt a phantom pain in my left arm. I'd been experiencing strange, dizzy spells for the past 2 months. I'd felt a fatigue that wasn't like me, an occasional numbness in my extremities. I'd blamed it on the stress of the wedding, the natural decline of a 70-year-old body, and the relentless pressure of running a massive company. I had trusted Preston. When he fired my longtime personal doctor, claiming the man was outdated and negligent, I believed him. When he brought in his own specialist and handed me those special vitamin capsules every morning with a warm, caring smile, I swallowed them without hesitation. I had personally swallowed the death sentence handed to me by the man I'd welcomed into my home. In the dark of the trunk, Desmond let out a slow, silent breath through his nose. His massive hand tightened on my forearm, an iron grip that anchored me to reality, preventing me from doing something reckless like kicking the door open to strangle Preston with my bare hands. Desmond had served in war zones. He knew what a man on the edge of a breakdown looked like. I didn't need to speak. My rage was a physical, burning presence in that small space. Through the narrow gap, I watched Harper slip the glass vial into her pocket. She looked at Preston with eyes mixed with greed and a twisted form of adoration. "You really are a genius, you know that," she murmured, moving closer to him. "Victoria is completely oblivious. The poor, naive little princess actually thinks you love her." Preston scoffed, smoothing his perfect hair. "Victoria is just a means to an end. She's spoiled, exhausting, and desperate for affection. All I had to do was play the devoted listener, agree with her complaints about her overbearing father, and she handed me the keys to the castle. Once the money hits and the old man is buried, I'll tolerate her for a few months to keep up appearances. Then I'll file for a secret divorce, take my half of the marital assets, and leave her with a broken heart and an empty bank account. Harper, I promise you, we'll be sipping cocktails on a beach in St. Bart's before Christmas." The sheer cruelty of his words hit me harder than the realization that I was about to be murdered. He wasn't just planning to kill me and steal my wealth. He was actively mocking my daughter's pure, sincere love for him. Victoria wasn't perfect. She was headstrong and often clashed with me over my demanding nature, but she had an incredibly soft heart. She had defended Preston to me time and time again, insisting that I was too cynical, too suspicious of outsiders. She had begged me to accept him, to see the good in him. And he saw her as nothing more than a pathetic, disposable stepping stone. A cold, terrifying calm washed over me, numbing my entire body. I didn't move a muscle as their footsteps crunched away into the distance, leaving me in that stifling dark to listen to the hum of the catering trucks and the heavy thud of my own heart. I didn't scream. I didn't kick the trunk open in a fit of rage. The shock that had paralyzed me just minutes ago had vanished, replaced by the ruthless, calculating instinct that had helped me crush rivals on Wall Street for 40 years. When you realize you are trapped in a cage with a predator, panic is a death sentence. You don't make a sound until you have a weapon in your hand. Beside me, Desmond remained perfectly still until the heavy metal door of the estate kitchen clicked shut. Only then did he release his iron grip on my arm. He reached up and pressed the internal release latch. The heavy trunk popped open, and the harsh morning light flooded our cramped space. I crawled out, my joints aching from the awkward position, my expensive tuxedo wrinkled. I stood on the gravel and smoothed my jacket. My hands were steady, unnervingly so. I looked at Desmond. The retired Marine stood at attention, his jaw tight as carved stone. He knew, or at least suspected, the depth of this betrayal, and he had risked everything to show me the truth. "I owe you my life, Desmond," I said, my voice barely a whisper but heavy with authority. He gave a sharp, professional nod. "We have a massive security breach, sir. I need to get you out of here now." I shook my head. "No," I told him, looking up at the sprawling, magnificent estate that was supposed to host the happiest day of my daughter's life. "If I disappear now, Preston will know his plan has been exposed. He and Harper will vanish, and he will find another way to take my money and my life. More importantly, if I stop this wedding now without ironclad public evidence, Victoria will never forgive me. She is completely blinded by him. She would believe any lie he spun to explain his sudden departure. I can't just save my life. I have to dismantle his illusion completely." I looked around at the pristine grounds, the manicured hedges, and the elegant white tents rising in the distance. The $500,000 I had spent on this wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a carefully curated execution chamber. From the remote location to the specific brand of champagne, every detail had been chosen to facilitate my death. I turned to Desmond, my mind racing. "I need you to lock down my perimeter immediately," I commanded. "For the next day, you are my shadow. Do not consume anything provided by the catering staff. Do not let anyone unauthorized near my room. Most importantly, you must not show a hint of hostility toward Preston. We are going to smile. We are going to shake his hand, and we are going to play our parts to perfection." Desmond adjusted his suit jacket, scanning the alley for hidden cameras. "What about the chemical mixture, sir?" he asked. "He plans to poison your toast." I felt a cold smile touch my lips. "We're going to let him try," I said. "But before we enter the reception, I need to secure my assets and disable his bioweapon." I reached into my pocket for my business device. It was time to launch a silent war. The secret to building my empire had always been predicting my enemy's moves. Preston thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess, and that I was just a wealthy, unsuspecting pawn. He had severely underestimated the man he was trying to kill. I took a deep breath of the warm Texas air, pushing the profound grief of seeing my daughter so cruelly manipulated to the side. There would be time to mourn her innocence later. Right now, I had to save her future. I instructed Desmond to return to his post near the front entrance and act as if nothing had happened. I walked back toward the front door of the estate with a gentle, unsuspecting smile on my face. I nodded to the florist holding a bundle of white roses. I greeted the wedding coordinator's assistant as she hurried past me with her clipboard. Deep down, I was organizing a meticulous timeline. I had to reverse engineer every decision Preston had made over the last few months. I had to dissect his flawless lies and find the digital tripwires he had buried in my life. As I walked through the grand foyer, surrounded by the fruits of my own success, I realized how easily I had been led to the slaughter. I had walked into this trap willingly because I wanted my daughter to be happy. I had allowed my blind spot as a father to override my business acumen. But that vulnerability was gone. The father had stepped aside. The CEO had taken the wheel. I was going to let Preston walk to that altar. I was going to let him believe he had won. And then I was going to tear his entire world to pieces. To make sure I didn't tip my hand, I walked toward the groom's dressing area. I needed to look him in the eye and give an Oscar-worthy performance. I found Preston standing before a gilded mirror, adjusting his bow tie. He looked calm and radiant, hiding an absolute ruthlessness beneath his polished exterior. "Preston, good man," I called out, walking into the room. He turned, and a bright, emotional smile instantly bloomed across his face, a sight that made my stomach turn. "Gregory," he said, walking forward to shake my hand, "I'm so glad you're here. How are you feeling this morning?" I forced my hand to remain steady. "I feel fantastic, Preston," I replied, letting a slight tremor into my voice to play the part of the aging patriarch. "I wanted to come over and thank you. You've made Victoria so happy. I couldn't ask for a better man to join our family today." Preston placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. His touch felt like venom seeping into my jacket. "It's my honor, sir," he said earnestly. "I promise you, for the rest of my life I will take care of her and your legacy." I returned the smile, looking deep into his lying eyes. "I know you will, Preston," I said softly. "I know exactly what you're going to do today." I patted his arm and left the room. Every step away from him strengthened my resolve. The board was set. He had made his first move in the dark, but the final checkmate would belong to me in the blinding sunlight. I walked down the grand mahogany staircase, my thoughts drifting back to how we had ended up in this beautiful, gilded cage. 4 months ago, none of this was the plan. We were originally scheduled to host the wedding at a historic, heavily secured hotel in downtown Dallas. It was a classic, mature venue where my corporate security team held the absolute home field advantage. But Preston had orchestrated a scene to change the venue, laying the foundation for his trap with the precision of a master manipulator. It was a rainy Tuesday night in November. I was sitting in my home office reviewing quarterly logistics reports when Victoria and Preston walked in. Victoria looked radiant, clutching a glossy brochure, while Preston followed a half-step behind. He wore the same sincere, respectful expression I had just seen upstairs. He kept his hand gently on the small of her back, playing the image of a loyal, protective partner. Victoria hopped over to my desk and dropped the thick brochure onto my financial statements. "Daddy, we found it," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "The perfect place." The brochure advertised an expansive, ultra-modern luxury estate tucked deep in the Texas Hill Country outside of Austin. It boasted off-grid capabilities, smart home integration, and absolute privacy. I frowned, pushing up my reading glasses. "What's wrong with the hotel in Dallas?" I asked. "We've already put down a significant deposit, and it's only 10 minutes from corporate headquarters. It's convenient for our security team and the board members." Preston stepped forward, placing his hands respectfully on the edge of my desk. He leaned in, lowering his voice to that perfect, reasonable tone, the same tone he used when pitching new corporate acquisitions to the board. "Gregory, the hotel is a great venue," he began, his tone dripping with fake deference. "But it's a logistical nightmare for our privacy. It's right in the center of the city. We already have 3 different paparazzi agencies trying to bribe hotel staff for the guest list. You know how aggressive they are regarding your personal life and Victoria's whereabouts. I won't let her special day turn into a media circus." I looked at Victoria. Her happy smile had faded slightly, replaced by a subtle anxiety. Preston knew exactly how to exploit her hatred for the tabloids, an aversion born from years of growing up in the wearying shadow of my wealth. "This estate in Austin," Preston continued, tapping the glossy brochure, "is a fortress. It sits on 200 acres of private land. It has only one easily controlled access point. But more importantly, Gregory, it has a closed-loop internal digital network. It is completely disconnected from the public power grid. That means for you and our high-profile guests, it has absolute cybersecurity. No one can hack the wireless system. No one can leak photos. It will protect the privacy of you and your family absolutely. It was a flawless, brilliant argument. He played directly into my most deeply rooted instinct to protect my daughter and my digital data at all costs. I took pride in my security. I spent tens of millions annually protecting my business assets from digital espionage. Preston had mastered my psychological blind spots. He spoke my specific language. He had packaged a lethal, calculating trap as the ultimate shield. A closed-loop network, I repeated, contemplating the concept. You've personally vetted their security infrastructure. Personally vetted, Preston said, looking me straight in the eye as he lied. I had our internal tech team run a preliminary diagnostic. It's completely airtight, sir. Victoria will have the fairy tale wedding she deserves, and you will have total peace of mind. I looked back at my daughter. She was radiant again, eagerly awaiting my approval. I had spent my life depriving her of normal experiences because of the heavy shackles that came with our vast wealth. I was desperate to give her this perfect, pure day. I sighed, taking off my glasses and throwing them on the wooden desk. All right, I said. If the security is solid, we'll move the venue to Austin, but I want our people in charge of the perimeter. Preston smiled, revealing a bright, victorious set of perfect white teeth. Of course, Gregory. I'll coordinate with your head of security personally to ensure a seamless transition. 4 months later, as I walked the busy corridors of this estate, the chilling shrewdness of his strategy echoed in my mind. The move to Austin had nothing to do with paparazzi or Victoria's comfort. It was a calculated step in his plot to assassinate me and embezzle my funds. By moving us to a remote location, he physically isolated me from my core medical team and security agency. The hotel in Dallas was 3 blocks away from a top-tier trauma center. This estate was 45 minutes from the nearest hospital via winding, narrow country roads. For heart failure, that 20-minute window was a guaranteed death sentence. But the most sinister part of his lie was the closed-loop network. He didn't need a closed-loop network to keep hackers out. He needed a closed-loop network to lock me in. By isolating the estate's servers from the public web, he ensured my personal and business devices would be forced to connect to the internal network. A network that would be completely and totally controlled by him and his criminal wife, Harper. It was the only way they could intercept the biometric proxy without triggering my corporate security algorithms to flag the massive offshore transfer. They desperately needed a digital vacuum to execute a $150 million theft in total silence. Every catering server walking past me, every beautiful floral arrangement hanging from the vaulted ceilings, was being paid for by the very man they were preparing to murder. Preston had built my tomb with my own money. He had weaponized my deep love for Victoria, twisting my fundamental desire to protect her into the exact mechanism that would lead to my downfall. He had played the role of a devoted, caring protector so perfectly that I had almost thanked him for digging my grave. I stopped in front of a massive arched window, staring out at the estate's sprawling green lawn. The morning sun was warming the earth, casting long, peaceful shadows across the manicured grass. It looked like paradise. It felt like a nightmare. I watched 2 valet attendants parking the luxury vehicles of guests who were arriving in a steady stream. My closest friends, my business partners, and my family were unwittingly walking into a crime scene. Preston had orchestrated a masterpiece of deception. He had isolated me geographically, compromised me medically, and trapped me digitally. He thought he had won. He thought I was just an ignorant old man waiting to pay the bill before I died. But I wasn't a victim. I was the architect of my own empire, and I was about to dismantle his. To fully understand the depth of Preston's malice, I had to look back at how he had systematically dismantled my defenses. Changing the venue was only the start. It was how he secured the perimeter. His next target was more intimate. He needed to compromise my physiology. It began exactly 2 months ago, during a routine Sunday dinner at my estate in Dallas. My left hand had been experiencing a very slight, almost imperceptible tremor. It was nothing more than a minor neurological flicker, a harmless byproduct of age and decades of high-pressure executive decisions. My longtime personal physician, Dr. Linwood, had managed my health perfectly for nearly 30 years. He had assured me the tremor was benign, prescribing basic rest and a standard blood pressure medication. But Preston didn't see that minor flicker as a symptom of aging. He saw it as a golden window of opportunity. That Sunday, as I struggled slightly to pour a glass of Cabernet, Preston was immediately at my side. He gently took the bottle from my shaking hand, his face carved with a deep, faked concern. Victoria watched from the other end of the table, her eyes filled with sudden worry. Preston didn't make a scene, but he planted the seeds of doubt with absolute precision. He leaned in, whispering that we needed to take my health more seriously, especially with the wedding approaching. Within 48 hours of that dinner, Preston had launched a medical coup. He sat Victoria down and convinced her that Dr. Linwood was dangerously outdated. He pulled up fabricated statistics and obscure medical journals on his tablet, arguing that older doctors often ignored early warning signs of serious neurological decline. He terrified my daughter. He made her believe that if we didn't take decisive, immediate action, I might not even be able to walk her down the aisle. Victoria, driven by pure panic and her deep love for me, begged me to listen to her fiancé. I loved my daughter too much to bear the sight of her tears, so I yielded to her relentless pleading. I allowed Preston to take over my medical care. He personally called Dr. Linwood to fire him. I can still hear his voice from the hallway when he made that call, crisp, imperious, and completely devoid of empathy. He told a man who had saved my life during a severe bout of pneumonia a decade ago that his services were no longer needed. By severing my link to Dr. Linwood, Preston removed the only medical professional who had an intimate understanding of my baseline health. He blinded my defenses, paving the way for his own hand-picked operative to enter my home and begin administering the chemical compounds designed to end my life in silence. The very next morning, Preston introduced his replacement. He brought a man named Dr. Ellington directly to my corporate office. Ellington didn't look like a traditional cardiologist or neurologist. He wore a sharp, tailored suit instead of a lab coat and carried a sleek leather briefcase. Preston introduced him as a premier specialist in holistic medicine, a concierge doctor for ultra-high net worth individuals seeking cutting-edge preventative optimization. Ellington spoke in a smooth, reassuring tone, using buzzwords like cellular regeneration, biohacking, and longevity. He gave my hand a brief, purely superficial examination, measured my blood pressure, and then confidently declared that traditional medicine had failed me. He promised that within a few weeks, his custom regimen would completely eliminate the tremor and restore my youthful vitality. Looking back from the dark reality of this wedding day, I realized Ellington might not have been a doctor at all. He was likely just another highly paid actor in Preston's lethal theater, brought in to legitimize the poison. Ellington opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 heavy, dark amber glass bottles. He placed them on my mahogany desk with a dramatic, reassuring nod. "These are proprietary cellular supplements," Ellington explained smoothly, holding up one of the heavy bottles. "They are formulated specifically for your neurological condition. You must take 2 capsules every morning with your coffee. Do not miss a single dose. It is absolutely vital for the chemical compounds to accumulate correctly in your system. I looked at the dark bottles on my desk and felt a faint, irrational prick of hesitation. I am a man who reviews every last comma in multi-billion-dollar real estate contracts. Yet I was prepared to swallow an entirely unknown substance, simply because my future son-in-law recommended it. Sensing my hesitation, Preston stepped forward, closing the physical distance between us. He placed his hand directly on mine. His grip was firm, carrying an undeniable warmth. He looked at me with an expression of such deep, meticulously fake devotion that it bypassed my usual hardened skepticism. "I just want you to be at 100% for the father-daughter dance, sir," Preston said softly, his voice filled with precisely calibrated emotion. He looked effortlessly deep into my eyes, playing the role of the caring, fiercely protective son to absolute perfection. When my father's health started declining years ago, these supplements worked absolute miracles for him. I want Victoria to look back on our wedding day and remember how strong and vibrant you looked while holding her hand. Please, Gregory. For her, for us. His gentle, calculated words were a masterclass in severe, psychological manipulation. By bringing up his own father and leveraging my overwhelming love for Victoria, he neutralized my defensive instincts completely. He made the act of taking unknown pills feel like a grand gesture of paternal sacrifice. I nodded, thanked him for his diligence, and promised I would follow the strict daily regimen without hesitation. From that day on, those dark amber bottles sat prominently on my kitchen counter. Every morning, Victoria would watch happily as I swallowed the 2 large capsules with my black coffee. She would smile brightly, completely unaware that she was actively supervising the systematic poisoning of her own father. Preston had succeeded in weaponizing my daughter's love against me, using her innocence to guarantee my compliance. He knew I would never question a habit that made her feel safe and secure. The scale of this emotional cruelty transcended basic human understanding. The lethal blueprint was absolutely flawless. The remote venue trapped me physically, the digital firewall trapped my wealth, and the daily supplements trapped my declining body. He had skillfully used the fragile threads of family trust to quietly place a noose around my neck. Now, as the morning sun hit the gravel of the service alley, this full, horrific picture was finally clear. The trap had been meticulously set, and the executioner was waiting patiently at the altar. But Preston had made a catastrophic calculation error in his grand design for murder. He forgot that an experienced wolf, one that has survived relentlessly in the brutal corporate jungle for 70 long years, never forgets exactly how to hunt its prey. To understand how Preston planned to siphon $150 million from a highly secure discretionary trust, I had to trace his steps back to the final Trojan horse. He couldn't bypass my corporate firewalls from the outside. The digital security I employed was virtually impenetrable to external threats. He needed an insider, someone with administrative access who could walk through the front door and plant the virus directly into the host. That person was Harper, the elite event coordinator from New York. This happened exactly 1 month ago in the boardroom at the top of the Caldwell Tower in downtown Dallas. Victoria had been under immense stress regarding the escalating logistical nightmare of the Austin estate. The vendor list was expanding rapidly, catering contracts were highly complex, and the floral arrangements required international shipping logistics. Preston, playing the role of the ultimate problem solver, suggested we bring in elite outside help. He told us he had pulled strings in New York to secure Harper's services, touting her as the most exclusive event coordinator on the entire East Coast. That Tuesday morning, when she walked into my boardroom, she fit the role perfectly. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal pantsuit, carried a sleek leather portfolio, and radiated an aura of absolute, ruthless capability. Victoria was instantly mesmerized by her confidence. Harper spoke with machine-gun precision, identifying logistical bottlenecks and offering brilliant, direct solutions. She charmed my daughter, complimented the view from my office, and presented herself as the savior of the ultimate luxury wedding. I was impressed. I am a man who respects extreme competence, and Harper played the role of a high-energy executive coordinator absolutely perfectly. After spending an hour effortlessly resolving Victoria's anxieties about the seating chart, Harper turned her sharp, calculating gaze directly toward me. She opened her leather portfolio and slid a thick stack of vendor contracts across the polished mahogany table. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, her tone shifting from warm wedding planner to serious financial strategist. "The scale of this event is significant. We are dealing with over 40 independent contractors, international shipping tariffs, and significant local tax liabilities. Processing these invoices one by one through your personal accounts is going to be a massive headache for your personal assistant. It is highly inefficient." I leaned back in my leather chair, curious about her sudden pivot to corporate logistics. "And how, exactly, do you suggest we handle this, Harper?" I asked. She flashed a crisp, professional, and entirely fraudulent smile. "I use a proprietary event management software designed specifically for ultra-high-net-worth clients," she explained smoothly. "If we link my vendor payment system directly into your master corporate accounts, I can automate the entire back-end finances for the wedding. It will categorize every expense instantly, handle international wires automatically, and format the data perfectly for your CFO. Mr. Caldwell, this will save your accounting team hours of manual labor. It will drastically simplify tax write-offs, and it will completely eliminate any potential clerical errors." This sounded like music to a CEO's ears. Efficiency, automation, and tax optimization. Preston sat beside her, nodding earnestly in agreement, playing his part to perfection. "I can personally oversee the entire software integration with our dedicated IT department," he added smoothly. "This would free up your personal assistant to focus on your actual business operations, rather than chasing invoices for imported orchids." I looked at both of them, completely missing the lethal synchronization in their pitch. What I saw was a brilliant event coordinator and a financially responsible future son-in-law trying to save my company time and resources. I did not see an executioner and a thief. I picked up my gold pen, signed the authorization forms, and didn't hesitate for a single second. Within 48 hours, Preston had personally completed the software integration with my IT director. Harper's proprietary wedding management system was granted administrative access to the deepest levels of my corporate financial network. I had effectively unbolted the heavy steel doors of my empire, invited these predators in, and offered them a comfortable seat. Standing in the grand hallway of the Austin estate, the memory of that boardroom meeting burned in my mind like battery acid. That software wasn't designed to pay florists or caterers. It was a digital parasite, an invisible, silent tunnel dug directly beneath the vault of my discretionary trust. For a full month, that software had been quietly mapping the internal pathways of my wealth, bypassing firewalls from the inside, patiently waiting for the final command. The encrypted flash drive Preston had handed Harper in the dirty service alley earlier was the detonator. The biometric override he mentioned was my digital signature, the final, absolute authorization needed to initiate the massive transfer. The second the efficient hits submit on that digital marriage certificate, Harper will plug the flash drive into her tablet. The software will register the marriage, activate the biometric override, drain $150 million from my corporate reserves, and funnel it into Cayman Island accounts without leaving a trace. 20 minutes later, The poisoned champagne will ensure I'm never around to launch a formal corporate investigation. I walked into the opulent grand ballroom where the reception was planned. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, elegant glow over the meticulously set tables. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the centerpieces, filling the room with a rich, sweet scent. It was a stunning display of wealth, a perfect illusion masking a sinister reality. I stopped at the head table, staring at the exquisite, clear crystal champagne flute perfectly placed at my designated seat. In a few hours, Harper plans to pour my death date into that glass. I pulled my secure mobile device from my breast pocket. The rage in my veins had solidified into a cold, absolute focus. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to confront them and demand a pathetic explanation. That is the reaction of a weak man, a man who lets his emotions dictate his strategy. I am Richard Caldwell. I make my living destroying rivals. I dismantle hostile takeovers before breakfast. Preston and Harper think they're executing a flawless heist, but they've handed me the exact tools needed to orchestrate their absolute, undeniable destruction. I dialed the direct line to my lead security architect in Dallas, a man who answers only to me. He picked up on the first ring. I gave him a series of rapid, extremely specific instructions. I ordered him to isolate the wedding management software, establish a shadow network around the Cayman routing protocols, and prepare to freeze every digital asset connected to Preston's name. I didn't cut the connection. I'm letting the Trojan horse stay inside the gates, but I've quietly changed the locks on the vault. When Harper tries to trigger that transfer, she won't be stealing my wealth. She will be inadvertently dumping that fortune directly into a secure holding account fully controlled by federal investigators. I hung up and looked back at that pristine crystal flute. The financial trap has been neutralized, but the biological threat is still active. I need to deal with the poison, and I need to do it in a way that exposes Preston in front of every single guest. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, my footsteps on the thick carpet completely silent. The grand ceremony is about to begin, and I am perfectly prepared to play the part of the loving, unsuspecting father until the very moment I shatter their lives. But the reason I'm alive today isn't just because I overheard their conversation in the alley. To reach this level of tactical clarity, my own body had to sound the alarm. The real awakening happened 3 weeks ago, long before we stepped foot on this remote Austin estate. It was a subtle, terrifying physical malfunction that forced my buried survival instincts back to the surface. It was a late Thursday night at my home in Dallas. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in my study. I had been dutifully following the holistic medical regimen Preston had proposed for over a month. Every morning, under the watchful, loving gaze of my daughter, I swallowed the 2 dark amber capsules Dr. Ellington had prescribed. Preston had been incredibly thoughtful, constantly asking how my hand felt, if my energy levels were stable, and ensuring my schedule was free of unnecessary stress. I believed I was being cared for by an incredibly loyal future son-in-law. I poured myself a large glass of aged single malt scotch, a long-standing evening habit. Preston was well aware of this ritual. He had even gifted me the very bottle I was drinking, praising its complex flavor profile. I leaned back in my heavy armchair, took a long sip of the amber liquid, and opened a financial dossier. I didn't even make it to the second page. Within 5 minutes of the alcohol hitting my bloodstream, a sudden, dizzying wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't mild discomfort. It felt like the oxygen in the room had been sucked out instantly. I gasped for air, dropping the heavy dossier to the floor. Then the pain hit. It was a horrifying, crushing agony radiating from the center of my chest. It felt like a massive anvil had been dropped directly onto my ribcage. My vision narrowed into a dark, pulsing tunnel. I tried to stand to call for Desmond or reach for the phone on my desk, but my legs wouldn't hold me. I collapsed to the floor, hands and knees, my fingers clutching helplessly at the thick Persian rug. The crystal glass slid from my hand, shattering into dozens of sharp shards on the hardwood. The whiskey spilled across my trembling hands. Every heartbeat felt like a jagged blade slicing through my lungs. I couldn't take a full breath. I was suffocating in my own study, convinced I was experiencing a massive, fatal heart attack. I waited for the final dark curtain to fall. I waited for my body to give up. But then, something miraculous and highly unnatural happened. Exactly 3 minutes after the crushing pain began, it vanished. It didn't fade slowly. It stopped instantly, leaving me gasping for air. I lay in a pool of cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs with a frantic but steady rhythm. I lay on the floor for a long time, chest heaving, staring at the shattered glass and the spilled liquor. My mind, sharpened by decades of corporate warfare, immediately began a diagnostic analysis. A natural heart attack doesn't just stop like a light switch. A natural cardiac event leaves lingering, undeniable damage. This was a severe, violent chemical reaction. My instincts, the ones that had protected me from ruthless predators on Wall Street, suddenly flared with blinding intensity. I hadn't changed my diet. I hadn't changed my exercise habits. I hadn't changed my evening scotch. The only new variable in my entire biological ecosystem was the holistic supplement that Preston and his unverified doctor insisted I take. I slowly climbed off the floor, my hands shaking, not from the nerve tremor, but from the adrenaline of a man who had just avoided a hidden landmine. I walked to the kitchen and stared at the dark amber bottles sitting innocently next to the coffee maker. In that quiet, chilling moment, I realized Preston had been very interested in my evening scotch habit. He had casually asked a week ago if I still liked to unwind with a drink at night. He was probing for data. He was testing the chemical timeline. These capsules weren't curing my tremor. They were meticulously saturating my cell walls, waiting for a catalyst to trigger catastrophic heart failure. The scotch was just a minor, premature catalyst. A full glass of high-acidity wedding champagne would be the main course. I didn't rush to the hospital. I didn't call the police or alert my daughter. If I sounded the alarm without ironclad proof, Preston would deny everything. He would claim the supplements were perfectly benign and hint that something was wrong with my mind. He would use the medical incident to declare me unfit for duty, accelerating his control over my empire. I had to handle this with extreme, lethal caution. I picked up the amber bottles from the counter. I opened them, walked to the sink and dumped the contents out. The black powder disappeared into the drain. I meticulously rinsed away the residue. From that night on, my morning routine became a calculated performance. Every morning at breakfast, I would take out 2 empty capsules I had carefully reassembled and filled with harmless baking soda. I would swallow them right in front of Victoria and Preston, washing them down with my coffee, and offering them a warm smile for their surface-level concern for my health. I was conducting a deep, daily deception, but simply stopping the poison wasn't enough. To maintain the illusion and feed Preston's growing arrogance, I had to let him believe his wicked plan was working perfectly. I began to feign a slow, steady physical decline. During corporate meetings, I would intentionally let my hands shake violently while holding a pen. I would occasionally rub my chest, pretending to be in mild distress. I would complain of unusual fatigue and leave family dinners early. Watching Preston's reaction to my fake symptoms brought a sick sense of satisfaction. Every time my hand shook, I saw a brief flicker of victory in his dark eyes, which he would instantly mask with a look of extreme concern. He would rush to my side, hand me a glass of water, and gently remind me to take care of myself. He played the part of the deeply worried son to perfection, completely unaware that I was actively studying his every move. I watched him build the plan to murder me step by step, and I filed the entire blueprint in my mind. He thought he had successfully weakened the lion. He didn't know the lion was just crouching in the tall grass, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The perfect moment to gather undeniable evidence came 3 days before the wedding. We drove to the sprawling Austin compound for a final site rehearsal. Victoria was vibrating with excitement in the passenger seat, gushing about floral arrangements and lighting schedules. Preston sat beside her, holding her hand, nodding attentively to every word. I sat in the front passenger seat, staring out at the rolling Texas hills, playing the part of the quiet, weary patriarch. My fake tremor had become a standard feature of my daily performance. As the vehicle drove up the long, winding driveway toward the main house, I let my left hand shake violently on my lap. Preston noticed, of course. He always noticed. He leaned forward, offering a deeply empathetic smile, assuring me that the fresh country air and the holistic supplements would have me feeling strong by the weekend. I thanked him weakly, while my mind was analyzing the tactical layout of the estate we were approaching. The perimeter was secure indeed. High stone walls, a single entrance with heavy iron gates, and dense woodlands surrounding the property. It was a beautiful, isolated fortress. As we pulled up to the grand foyer, Harper greeted us with her signature clipboard and crisp, professional smile. She immediately whisked Victoria and Preston away for a tour of the ballroom, leaving me to wander the main floor under the pretense of admiring the architecture. In reality, I was testing my communication lines. I pulled my secure business smartphone from my jacket pocket. This device uses a private satellite relay network for encryption. My company spends thousands of dollars monthly to maintain it. It is designed to have a signal even in the middle of the ocean or deep underground. Yet, as I stood in the sun-drenched grand atrium of this Austin estate, the screen showed absolutely zero service. No signal. No network connection. The closed-loop internal network, Preston touted as a privacy feature, was actually running an aggressive, localized signal jammer. It blocked all outgoing communications that weren't routed directly through their corrupted server. They had completely cut off my digital oxygen. A cold sweat ran down my back, not from fear, but from the clear realization of the extent of their audacity. They intended to murder me and steal my empire, ensuring that before my heart stopped beating, I wouldn't be able to send a single desperate message or trigger a corporate alarm. I tucked the dead phone back into my pocket and walked toward the courtyard, needing to observe Preston at close range. I found him standing at the edge of the manicured lawn, just yards away from Victoria and Harper, who were arguing about the placement of the string quartet. Preston thought no one was watching him. He had his back to the main house, looking out at the oak trees. I watched him reach into the inner pocket of his custom jacket and pull out a cheap, disposable burner phone. A man with 3 different high-end business devices has absolutely no legitimate reason to carry an untraceable piece of plastic. I stood perfectly still behind a large stone pillar. This estate was supposed to be a total digital dead zone, a cellular data black hole. My state-of-the-art satellite phone was nothing more than a useless brick in my pocket. But then in the absolute quiet of the afternoon, I heard a crisp, distinct chime. Preston's burner phone had just received a text. He glanced at the screen, typed a quick reply, and tucked the device back into his pocket with an unreadable, intensely focused expression. He had whitelisted his own hidden device through the jamming software. He and Harper were maintaining a secure, invisible communication line with the outside world, coordinating the final, lethal logistics of the offshore transfer, while the rest of us were left in the dark, digitally suffocated. The Trojan horse was fully operational, and the gates had been locked from the inside. That night, I retreated to my assigned quarters early, citing exhaustion from the long drive and site tour. I locked the heavy wooden door of my suite and sat in the velvet armchair by the window, waiting in the dark. The estate was silent. The staff had all returned to their off-site living quarters for the night. At 3:15 a.m., there was a soft, rhythmic knock on my door. 2 quick taps, a pause, then one more. It was the security protocol knock Desmond and I had established over a decade ago. I opened the door silently to let him in. My head of security moved like a ghost, his massive frame completely silent on the hardwood floors. He didn't turn on the lights. He stood in the shadows, his face illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through the heavy curtains. "We have a major problem, sir," Desmond whispered, his voice low, tight, and held with controlled urgency. "I've been monitoring the internal sensor logs from the estate's main control room. 10 minutes ago, I caught Harper on the service hallway cameras. She wasn't checking floral arrangements or catering lists. She used a decrypted keycard to access the main server room in the basement. She locked the door from the inside and stayed there for a full 9 minutes. Gregory, wedding planners don't configure servers in the middle of the night. She is changing the network architecture." I absorbed the information, feeling the cold, hard reality of their plan solidify into concrete form. Harper wasn't just an event coordinator. She was a highly sophisticated digital operative. She had spent those 9 minutes planting the final execution code into the corrupted wedding software, linking it directly to the biometric override on that encrypted flash drive. The second Preston kissed my daughter at the altar, the digital proxy agreement would ignite, draining the blind trust dry. I looked at Desmond in the dark. His eyes were bright, waiting for my command. He was ready to storm the basement, grab Harper by her tailored collar, drag her out, and dismantle the entire operation by force. But brute force wouldn't give me the absolute victory I needed. I needed them to trigger the trap so I could slam that heavy steel door shut on their own necks. I ordered Desmond to return to his post, monitor the cameras, and intervene in nothing. We would let the wedding proceed exactly according to their plan. We would let them stand at the altar, believing they had conquered the world. The pain of watching Victoria walk down the aisle toward a predator would be unbearable, but that was the price that had to be paid to save her completely. I would endure their fake smiles, their poisoned champagne, and their suffocating digital isolation. I slowly sat back in the heavy velvet chair, crossed my arms, and gazed out at the silent, dark estate. I was finally ready to end this lethal corporate war forever. I would shatter their arrogant illusions completely and safely rescue my child. The morning sun shone through the heavy silk curtains of my private suite, casting long, sharp shadows across the antique mahogany furniture. I had spent the entire night running endless tactical simulations in my mind, calculating their grand plan. The most volatile factor in the entire operation wasn't the flash drive or the compromised server room. It was my daughter. I needed to know exactly how deep Preston had buried his psychological hooks into Victoria. Before detonating this fraudulent wedding, I had to precisely measure the structural integrity of her loyalty. I left the suite and moved through the busy corridors of the estate. I navigated through a crowd of catering staff and florists who were frantically preparing the venue for the afternoon ceremony. I found Victoria sitting alone on the terrace of the courtyard. She was wrapped in a plush, white robe, drinking tea. She looked breathtaking, radiating that rare, fragile expectation of a bride on her wedding morning. I knew I was about to test the foundation of her happiness, and it broke my heart. I walked over, pulled up an iron chair across from her, and sat down. She smiled warmly, reaching out to give my hand a gentle squeeze. Her fingers were trembling slightly from nervousness and excitement. I gave her a reassuring, paternal smile, suppressing the massive wave of nausea that was nearly drowning me. We chatted casually for a few minutes about the weather, the floral arrangements, and the arrival of the remaining guests. Then I carefully shifted the direction of the conversation. I kept my tone light, completely devoid of any accusation, wrapping my words in the natural, lingering anxiety of a protective father giving away his only child. "Victoria, darling," I began in a thoughtful, slightly hesitant tone. "I was reviewing some final legal documents last night, just to wrap up the last few details buried deep in the clauses of the family trust. My legal team pointed out some minor anomalies in Preston's background check. Nothing explicitly concerning, just some gaps in his employment history before he joined our company, and some offshore financial routing that seemed unnecessarily complex for someone at his previous salary bracket. Have you two discussed his financial situation before the wedding?" Her transformation was instantaneous and terrifying to behold. That soft, radiant expression vanished from Victoria's face, replaced immediately by a rigid, impenetrable mask of defensive rage. She pulled her hand away from mine as if my touch had suddenly burned her skin. Her eyes, which had been so warm and expressive, hardened into sharp, hostile slits. She slammed her teacup onto the glass terrace table with enough force to splash hot tea onto the pure white tablecloth. "You always do this, Daddy," she erupted, her voice echoing sharply across the empty stone terrace. "You never trust anyone. You've spent my entire life interrogating everyone who has tried to get close to me. You treat everyone like a hostile corporate takeover waiting to happen. Preston is the best thing that has ever happened to me. He looks after your health. He has arranged this entire wedding to perfection. And he is the only man who loves me for who I am, not for your money. He doesn't care about your trust fund or your business empire. He cares about my happiness, and right now, you are doing a much worse job of that than he is." Her words hit me like a physical blow. The absolute conviction in her voice was chilling. Preston hadn't just charmed her. He had been systematically insulating her from my influence. He had anticipated my eventual skepticism and had preemptively turned her into a weapon against me. He had painted me as a paranoid billionaire, inevitably trying to sabotage her true love. It was a textbook psychological isolation. If I told her about my suspicions now, if I told her about the digital Trojan horse, the burner phone, or the toxic capsules without absolute, ironclad evidence, she would reject reality entirely. She would perceive my warning as the ultimate manifestation of my toxic paranoia. Preston would play the role of the wounded, noble victim. He would calmly suggest that my mind was finally failing, using my faked health decline as the final proof of my instability. Harper would silently delete the corrupted software, the offshore accounts would vanish, and the two of them would disappear into the wind, taking my daughter's heart with them. I sat in the morning light, staring at the fierce, defensive posture of my only child. I realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that my daughter had been completely brainwashed. She was a hostage who truly worshipped her captor. If I stopped this wedding now, I would save my fortune and my life, but I would lose Victoria forever. She would never forgive me for ruining her perfect day based on what she perceived as malicious, baseless delusions. The rift between us would be permanent. Even if Preston lost the financial battle, he would still win this psychological war. I couldn't simply pull the plug. I had to let the water run to the end of the circuit. I had to let Preston stand at the altar in front of 200 witnesses and attempt to execute his masterpiece. I had to let him press the detonator and let Victoria witness the explosion with her own eyes. It was the only way to shatter his illusion and break the deep, hypnotic control he held over her mind. I retreated immediately, raising my hands in a gesture of total surrender. I forced a look of deep, paternal remorse onto my face. "You're right, Victoria," I said softly, letting my shoulders slump with feigned defeat. I'm sorry. I'm just a foolish old man, terrified of letting go of a piece of my heart. I let my corporate paranoia get the better of me. Preston is a good man. I am incredibly proud to have him join our family. Please forgive me. Let's not ruin this beautiful morning because of my anxieties. Victoria stared at my face tensely for a long time. Slowly, the rigid anger melted from her posture, replaced by a lingering, exasperated pity. She let out a long sigh and reached across the table to give my arm a brief touch. "It's okay, Daddy," she murmured, her voice softening. "Just turn off your CEO brain for today. Just be my father." I nodded, offering a weak, trembling smile. I watched her pull her robe tight and walk back inside the estate to begin her bridal preparations. As the heavy glass door clicked shut behind her, my expression instantly turned completely ice cold. I slowly pulled out my secure mobile device and stared at the blank screen. My daughter had asked me to turn off my CEO brain. She had no idea that the CEO brain was the only thing standing between her and total, lifelong destruction. The invisible wall of isolation Preston had built around her was a masterpiece, but it was made of fragile glass. And in just a few hours, I was perfectly prepared to smash it into a million pieces. To shatter that glass without collateral damage, I needed a weapon forged from absolute, undeniable scientific fact. My daughter's blind devotion couldn't be broken by mere suspicions or circumstantial evidence regarding offshore accounts and burner phones. Preston had conditioned her to dismiss my corporate paranoia. I needed a truth so brutal and unarguable that it could instantly sever the psychological chains binding her to him. That truth wasn't in the ledgers, and it wasn't in the server room. It was locked inside the dark amber glass bottles sitting on my kitchen counter. After that terrifying physical malfunction in my study, the night the glass of scotch triggered a minor cardiac event prematurely, I knew I was dealing with a highly sophisticated biological weapon, but knowing wasn't enough. I needed a chemical breakdown. I needed the exact molecular blueprint of my orchestrated murder. The day after I flushed the original capsules down the drain and replaced them with baking soda, a new batch of holistic supplements arrived via private courier. Preston personally placed the new bottle on the kitchen island, reminding me with a warm smile that consistency was key to my recovery. I responded with a smile, thanked him for his diligence, and waited until he left to play golf. The second his car pulled out of the front gate, I grabbed the sealed bottle and locked myself in my study. I poured 2 capsules into a sterile plastic vial, sealed it in a nondescript padded envelope, and called Desmond. I told him we needed a deep background check on a proprietary substance, and this had to be done in total shadow. Desmond didn't ask questions. He utilized a contact from his military intelligence days, an independent, heavily guarded black site laboratory in the suburbs of Fort Worth. This facility didn't handle routine blood work or corporate drug testing. They specialized in identifying untraceable toxins, synthetic narcotics, and exotic chemical agents for clients who required absolute anonymity. I handed the padded envelope to Desmond in the underground parking garage of my corporate headquarters. I instructed him to drive the package to the laboratory himself, pay the rush processing fee with untraceable cash, and ensure that my name absolutely never appeared on any documentation. Waiting for the results was a grueling test of psychological endurance. For a full week, I had to continue playing the role of the declining patriarch. I sat across from Preston at family dinners, listening to him discuss logistical details of the wedding, while he confidently assumed a lethal compound was silently accumulating in my bloodstream. Every time he asked about my health, every time he gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, the urge to reach across the table and tear him apart roared in my veins. But I kept my cool. I swallowed the fake capsules, pretended my hand was shaking, and waited for science to validate my rage. Late on a Friday night, the answer finally arrived via an encrypted, self-destructing digital file sent directly to my secure terminal. I opened the toxicology report, the harsh glare of the computer screen illuminating the dark corner of my empty office. The lead toxicologist had written a detailed summary that read like a manual for a perfectly orchestrated assassination. The dark powder inside the holistic capsules Preston provided wasn't vitamins, minerals, or experimental longevity supplements. It was a highly refined, synthetic cardiovascular inhibitor. The report explained that the chemical was specifically engineered as a slow-accumulating binary agent. On its own, the powder was completely inert. It could remain in the human body for months without causing any adverse reaction. It simply bonded to the cell walls of the heart and major arteries, remaining dormant and completely invisible to standard medical blood panels. A traditional doctor performing a routine physical would detect absolutely nothing wrong with my cardiovascular health. This was why Preston was so confident administering it to me every morning in front of my daughter. He was building my tomb in plain sight. However, the true horror of this compound was its activation sequence. The toxicologist noted that the dormant chemical was highly volatile when exposed to a very specific set of biological catalysts. If the human body experienced a sudden, massive spike in blood acidity combined with a specific concentration of fermented alcohol, this inert powder underwent an instantaneous and violent structural change. It would constrict the coronary arteries, triggering a massive, catastrophic myocardial infarction. The heart would essentially tear itself apart from the inside out within minutes. The report concluded with a chilling clinical assessment, stating that forensic pathology would classify the event as a natural, sudden cardiac arrest. The chemical would dissipate during the infarction, leaving zero trace of foul play. I sat frozen in my leather chair, reading the chemical breakdown report over and over. My mind flew back to that terrifying night with the scotch. The liquor had acted as a minor, imperfect catalyst. It had been just enough to trigger a severe localized reaction, warning my body before the full lethal dose had accumulated. But Preston hadn't designed this poison to be triggered by a random evening drink. He was orchestrating a much grander, more public execution. My eyes scanned the section of the report detailing the specific alcohol and acidity requirements needed to reach the full, instantaneous cardiac arrest. The numbers matched a highly specialized configuration perfectly. The realization slammed into my chest like a freight train. I flashed back to a meeting with the caterers 3 weeks ago, finalizing the reception menu. I had suggested a standard, reliable champagne for the toast. Preston had vehemently disagreed. With unwavering, passionate zeal, he insisted we upgrade to a specific vintage. He claimed Victoria deserved the pinnacle of luxury. He personally ordered 30 cases of 2008 Paul Roger, a notoriously crisp champagne, famous for its distinctively high acidity and alcohol content. It was the perfect chemical catalyst to turn the dormant powder in my heart into a lethal weapon. The sheer sophistication of his malice left me suffocating. He was making me pay for the weapon myself, forcing my unsuspecting daughter to watch me consume it. He had calibrated the timeline so precisely that exactly 10 minutes after he slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger, the staff would pour the Paul Roger. We would toast. I would wish them a lifetime of happiness. 20 minutes later, I would collapse and die on the ballroom floor. They were orchestrating my murder in broad daylight, masked perfectly as a lavish celebration of love and family. The audacity of this betrayal extinguished the last flickering ember of mercy in my soul. I closed the toxicology file and permanently wiped the encryption key from my system. The death trap was set, but I alone held the remote detonator. To dismantle them completely, I needed undeniable leverage. The toxicology report gave me proof of the biological weapon, but I needed the full financial and historical blueprint of these executioners. I had to unmask these ghosts. The next morning, 48 hours before Victoria was set to walk down the aisle, I slipped out of the Austin estate under the pretense of a final tuxedo fitting in the city. Desmond drove me in an unmarked sedan to a deserted industrial parking lot. A nondescript moving van was parked in the furthest corner, shielded from surveillance. I climbed into the back. It was a rolling, state-of-the-art command center, vibrating with the hum of high-end servers. My longtime attorney, Mitchell Crawford, sat at a metal table, looking pale and deeply shaken. Beside him, two elite digital forensic experts were staring at glowing monitors, tracking the digital footprints we'd captured from the compromised wedding software and the intercepted signals from the burner phone. Mitchell began, his voice lacking its usual courtroom confidence. "Gregory," he said quietly, "what we've uncovered over the last 12 hours goes far beyond corporate espionage. The man currently sleeping in your guest room, the man your daughter intends to marry, does not exist. The identity of Preston is a meticulously crafted illusion." Mitchell slid a thick, heavily redacted dossier across the metal table. I opened it and scanned the truth. His real name was entirely different. He wasn't a rising star in corporate finance. He was a highly functional, dangerous gambler with a trail of financial wreckage spanning a decade. The experts had traced the routing protocols embedded in Harper's software. The destination accounts weren't standard tax havens. They linked directly to a ruthless international criminal syndicate. Preston wasn't just gambling with small debts. He had borrowed from a violent cartel to cover a series of catastrophic, high-risk losses. He owed them $15 million, and his deadline had passed 3 months ago. They had given him one final window to produce the funds, or they would end him. Victoria was never a romantic target. She was a convenient, secure bank vault, and he was the rat frantically trying to drill through the lock. The depravity of his motivation was staggering, but the cyber experts weren't finished. One analyst turned his monitor toward me, pulling up a series of legal documents and old mugshots. "We dug into the event coordinator," the analyst explained. "Her background as an elite New York planner is a complete fabrication. Her real name is Elena, a convicted cyber fraudster. 10 years ago, she served 3 years in federal prison for orchestrating an elaborate telecommunications scam against elderly investors. She is a master of social engineering and digital infiltration." But the most chilling detail wasn't her record. The analyst pulled up a scan of a faded municipal document from a small Nevada county. It was a marriage certificate, dated 7 years ago. The names on that official document belonged to the man calling himself Preston and the woman calling herself Harper. They weren't business partners. They were legally bound, husband and wife. The elite coordinator and the devoted fiancé were a pair of desperate, professional grifters. They had spent years hunting for the perfect, vulnerable target to pay off their fatal debt. They found Victoria, studied my vast wealth, and constructed a perfectly synchronized, lethal operation. I stared at the glowing monitors, a cold, dark void opening in my chest. The entire picture was illuminated. The $150 million they planned to siphon wasn't just for a lavish lifestyle. It was a desperate ransom. They intended to pay off the cartel immediately to buy back their lives, then vanish with the remaining $135 million as their retirement fund. To ensure they were never pursued, they had to permanently silence the only man with the resources and the ruthless will to hunt them across the globe. Murdering me was an operational requirement. By poisoning me, they eliminated the threat to their stolen empire. Victoria would be left as a grieving widow, completely unaware she'd been manipulated by a pair of married, sociopathic predators. I slowly closed the dossier and handed it back to Mitchell. I no longer felt rage. In its place was a polar, calculating calm. I ordered the digital lead to transfer every piece of evidence onto a highly encrypted portable hard drive. I needed the fake backgrounds, the marriage certificate, the cartel links, and the criminal records organized into a single, undeniable display. Desmond watched me from the shadows by the door, understanding exactly what was coming. The wedding was only hours away. The floral arrangements were being placed, the quartet was tuning up, and the lethal vintage champagne was chilling in silver buckets. Preston and Harper believed they were on the final stretch of their grand illusion. They believed the oblivious old man was safely neutralized, waiting calmly to drink his own death sentence. I stepped out of that unmarked van and into the bright afternoon sun, clutching the drive filled with the evidence of their destruction. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of their downfall. The conventional move would be to call federal authorities, cancel the wedding, and have them arrested before they finished their floral arrangements. That is what a cautious man would do, but I refused to let them slip into the maze of the legal system with their fake identities intact. I wanted them to walk to that altar. I wanted them to experience the intoxicating high of total victory before the floor beneath them collapsed. I spent the final 48 hours constructing a digital and biological guillotine. My first target was securing the $150 million they were planning to steal. I couldn't simply lock the main corporate accounts, as Harper's parasitic software would flag a sudden firewall and warn them of the trap. I had to make them believe the heavy vault doors were swinging wide open. Under the cover of night, I returned to Dallas and brought Mitchell and my cybersecurity team into my private suite. We spent the night coding a digital ghost. My techs created a honeypot server, an absolutely perfect, breathtakingly realistic mirror of my financial matrix. It displayed identical routing numbers, trust structures, and staggering balances. But the entire server was a localized, tightly controlled digital sandbox, completely disconnected from the global banking system. To Harper's software, it looked like an unprotected pipeline to my wealth. When she triggered the transfer at the ceremony, the parasite software would drain that $150 million, but the funds would only move from one fake folder to another inside my isolated server. While the digital team rendered this financial bait, I worked with Mitchell to secure my empire's tangible assets. I sat at my mahogany desk, reviewing stacks of urgent legal documents. With a swift, calm stroke of my gold pen, I signed away my wealth into a new, impenetrable discretionary trust, buried deep beneath layers of legal protection and international jurisdiction. By Friday, my true empire was invisible, safely locked in a legal bunker, leaving only that glittering, hollow honeypot server waiting for Harper and Preston to eagerly attempt their theft. The financial trap was armed. However, that digital safety net would be meaningless if my heart shattered on the polished hardwood of the Austin ballroom. I had to survive that glass of Paul Roger. The ultimate acidic catalyst for the synthetic poison Preston had been feeding me for a month. I couldn't refuse the toast without alerting him that I knew. I had to drink it willingly, endure the chemical catalyst, and survive to watch the terror sweep across his arrogant face. I contacted the only medical professional I truly trusted. I made a secret call to Dr. Linwood, the loyal Dr. Preston had fired. Late Thursday night, I had Desmond bring him to my Dallas estate via a secure service entrance. When I presented the toxicology report, the color drained from his face. He was horrified by the sheer malice of the compound they had deployed. We had exactly 24 hours to engineer a biological defense. Dr. Linwood worked through the night, consulting trusted independent toxicologists to synthesize a heavy, highly specialized chemical neutralizer. It was a potent, deep tissue blocker designed to coat my arterial walls and instantly neutralize the synthetic enzymes in the poison before the alcohol and acidity of the champagne could trigger the fatal vascular constriction. The procedure itself carried significant physical risks, but it was the only way to ensure I would be standing when the steel trap finally snapped shut around their necks. Fast forward to Saturday afternoon, 1 hour before I was scheduled to don my tuxedo for the ceremony. I sat shirtless on the edge of the plush bed in my Austin suite. Dr. Linwood stood beside me, his lined face set in a look of intense, unwavering focus as he prepared a heavy, specialized syringe. The thick liquid in the glass vial was a pale, icy blue. He wiped my shoulder with a cold alcohol swab, looked me in the eye, and asked one final time if I was absolutely certain I wanted to risk the heavy physical toll of this potent neutralizer. I nodded without a flicker of hesitation. I felt the sharp sting of the long needle, followed by a heavy, intense burning sensation as the thick chemical blocker surged into my muscle tissue. The neutralizer raced through my veins, causing my ears to ring and my vision to blur for a few terrifying seconds. A thick, heavy metallic taste coated the back of my throat, making me briefly gag. The intervention was brutal, causing my muscles to contract and my breathing to become shallow and labored. I gripped the thick sheets, riding out the overwhelming wave of synthetic nausea. But as my hammering heart rate stabilized and the burning faded into a dull, lingering ache, I knew my biological armor was fully deployed. I stood up, my breath returning to a steady rhythm. I walked to an antique mirror and stared at my reflection. I began buttoning my tuxedo shirt. My movements were precise. I discarded the pathetic tremor I had been faking. I tied my bow tie and shrugged on the jacket. The helpless patriarch was gone. I was the apex predator they had foolishly underestimated. The honeymoon was over before it had even begun. I stepped out of my suite and toward the grand foyer, every step carrying the weight of the coming destruction. The lingering ache in my shoulder from Linwood's injection served as a rhythmic reminder of my biological armor. I could feel the neutralizer coursing through my veins, a cold, heavy shield pulsing just beneath my skin. As I approached the double mahogany doors leading to the courtyard, the low rumble of 300 wealthy guests filtered through the wood. These were the power brokers of Texas, a hand-picked audience of senators, oil barons, and titans of industry. They were gathered here to witness the union of two dynasties. They had no idea they were attending a meticulously orchestrated assassination. The heavy doors swung open, and the brilliant afternoon sun spilled over me. The expansive courtyard had been transformed into a breathtaking sanctuary of white roses and draped silk. The quartet began playing the processional. The music was soaring and elegant, holding no hint of the dark, sinister reality pulsing just beneath the surface. I stood at the top of the marble stairs, looking out over the sea of expensive suits and designer gowns. The guests rose in unison, turning with polite, admiring smiles toward the end of the aisle. I took a deep breath, slumped my shoulders slightly, and let my left hand shake with a visible, noticeable tremor. In their eyes, I was no longer the apex predator. I was a frail, dying patriarch making one last brave effort to walk his daughter down the aisle. Victoria appeared beside me, emerging from the bridal suite like an untouchable phantom of purity. She wore a stunning custom ivory gown, the woven crystals and silk refracting light into a dazzling display. Her face was radiant, her eyes shimmering with pure, untainted tears of joy, an expression of complete, final surrender to a beautiful lie. When she gently slipped her arm into mine, my heart ached physically. I could feel the delicate warmth of her skin through the dark fabric of my tuxedo. She looked up at me, her expression softening into that tragic, deeply manipulated concern for my failing health. She squeezed my arm, silently asking if I had the strength to make the long walk. I gave her a weak, but affectionate smile and nodded slowly, as if summoning the last of my fading strength. "You look beautiful, darling," I whispered, ensuring my voice carried that perfect, raspy tremble of a man standing on the edge of the grave. We began our slow, measured descent down the grand marble staircase. With every step, I leaned my weight more heavily into her arm, forcing her to support me. I played the fading shell of a man to absolute perfection. The wealthy guests watched with deep, silent reverence. I could see profound pity etched onto the faces of my oldest business rivals and closest board members. They saw an industrial titan tragically reduced to a shaking, fragile husk, taking his final brave steps in the sunlight. They were witnessing the emotional crescendo of a beautiful family legacy. They did not know they were extras in a lavish, deeply insane drama staged by a desperate gambler. As we moved down the long white runner of the center aisle, my sharp, predatory gaze scanned the entire perimeter of the courtyard. I wasn't looking at the tearful guests or the cascading orchids. I was searching for the executioner. I found Harper standing silently in the deep, cool shade of a massive, ancient oak tree near the front row. She wore an elegant, understated charcoal dress, blending perfectly into the background like a dutiful, invisible servant of the event. But I knew exactly who she was. I knew her real name was Elena. I knew she was a convicted cyber fraudster, and I knew she was the legal wife of the man standing at the altar. In her perfectly manicured hands, she held a sleek silver iPad. To the unsuspecting guests, she was just checking digital seating charts or catering schedules. But I knew the truth. That tablet was linked directly to the compromised wedding software. Her finger hovered inches from the digital detonator. She was waiting for the officiant to sign the electronic registry. She was waiting to insert that flash drive, drain the 150 million, and hand it over to a violent international cartel. Our eyes met for a fleeting fraction of a second. She gave me a crisp, professional nod of encouragement, playing the supportive coordinator to the very last second. I nodded back, my hand shaking violently on Victoria's arm. Harper thought she was watching a target in the process of decay. She didn't realize I had cloned the entire corporate host and trapped her digital parasite in an empty, inescapable void. We reached the end of the long aisle, stopping at the base of the elevated floral altar. Preston was waiting there, in his custom black tuxedo, standing tall and devastatingly handsome. He looked the epitome of a loving, devoted partner. His dark eyes were locked onto Victoria, flashing with a highly faked, Oscar-worthy level of overwhelming adoration. As we stepped onto the altar, he immediately stepped forward to meet us. He didn't reach for Victoria's hand directly. He reached out and placed his warm, strong hand over mine, looking deep into my eyes with an expression of profound, manufactured gratitude. "You made it, Gregory," he whispered, his voice thick with calculated emotion, pitched just perfectly for the front row to hear his moving concern. "I know how much this cost you. I promise you I will take care of her for the rest of my life." The sheer, unadulterated sociopathy of his performance was breathtaking. He was looking directly into the eyes of the man he was actively planning to murder in less than 30 minutes, thanking me for handing my daughter and my fortune directly into his bloody hands. I looked back at him, forcing tears of paternal joy to well in my eyes. I gently placed Victoria's trembling hand into his. "I trust you, Preston," I replied, my voice cracking in a masterful display of pathetic weakness. "I entrust you with everything I have built." I slowly, laboriously took a step back and seated myself in my designated spot on the front bench. The soaring strings faded into a heavy, suffocating silence. The officiant began, his clear, resonant voice echoing across the crowd of guests who sat spellbound in the brilliant sun. The trap was fully set. The actors were in place, and the final, glorious countdown to their irreversible destruction had begun. The officiant, a distinguished man with a deep, booming voice, began the traditional welcome. He spoke eloquently of love, devotion, and the sacred bonds of marriage. The afternoon sun beat down on the courtyard, casting a golden hue over the gathered elite of Texas society. I sat ramrod straight on the front bench, my breathing slow and fully controlled, ignoring the heavy, radiating ache in my shoulder where the neutralizer pulsed with my veins. Every sense I possessed was elevated to a state of extreme, heightened awareness. I could hear the soft rustle of bridesmaid silk. I could hear the rhythmic, soft clicks of the hired photographer's shutters. In the periphery of my right eye, I could see Harper. She took a subtle step forward from the shadows of the oak tree. Her eyes were locked on the altar, her thumb resting lightly on the glowing screen of her sleek silver tablet. Waiting for the precise second, the digital registry was electronically filed. Preston stood before the officiant, his posture impeccably rigid, radiating the aura of a man who believed he had just successfully conquered an empire. He looked down at Victoria, the smile crafted so perfectly, so convincingly, that in any other circumstance I would have been proud to call him my son. Victoria looked back at him with absolute, blind adoration. She was utterly mesmerized by the grand illusion, entirely unaware that the man holding her hands was actively calculating the precise minutes until her father's agonizing death. The officiant concluded his opening blessings and paused, taking a breath to transition into the vows. Per the traditional structure of the ceremony, which Preston, ironically, had insisted we strictly adhere to for the sake of classic elegance, there was a specific, ancient question that had to be asked. It was a hollow relic of the past, a line nobody actually answered. The officiant looked out over the vast, silent sea of 300 wealthy guests. His voice rang out clearly across the manicured lawn. If there is anyone here who can show just cause why these two may not lawfully be joined as husband and wife, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The silence that followed was intended to last exactly 3 seconds. It was meant to be a brief pause before the exchange of rings. But I did not let the silence pass. I stood up from the heavy wooden bench. I didn't struggle. I didn't let my hands shake. I shed the persona of the frail, pathetic man I had worn for a month. I straightened my spine to a height of imposing authority, puffed out my chest, and stepped directly onto the raised floral altar. Victoria turned to look at me, a flash of deep, profound confusion crossing her beautiful features. "Daddy," she whispered, her brow furrowing in alarm, "what are you doing?" I didn't answer her immediately. I stepped forward, slowly unclasped Victoria's hands, and inserted myself between her and the man she believed she loved. I reached out and firmly snatched the microphone from the wooden lectern, pulling it directly from the startled officiant's hand. I turned to face the ocean of powerful, wealthy guests, and then I slowly turned to lock eyes with Preston. The confident smile he wore for Victoria shattered instantly, replaced by a flash of rigid, pure, unadulterated panic. He recognized the shift in my posture. He saw the cold, lethal clarity in my eyes. In that terrifying fraction of a second, he understood that the oblivious old man was dead and gone. "I object," I said, my voice like a thunderclap echoing through the suffocating silence of the courtyard. It was not a weak, trembling whisper. It was the deep, authoritative, uncompromising voice of a CEO delivering a lethal verdict. A collective gasp swept through the 300 guests. I heard the harsh scraping of chairs and the confused whispers of corporate titans and senators. Victoria instinctively recoiled, her hands flying to her mouth. "Daddy, don't," she pleaded, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. "You're ruining everything. Please just sit down." My gaze remained locked on Preston, watching the color drain rapidly from his face. "I cannot sit down, Victoria," I said, my voice eerily steady, absolutely ruthless. Because Texas does not recognize bigamy. And my daughter cannot legally marry a man who is still lawfully wedded to his event coordinator. A buzz of shocked, chaotic whispers erupted in the courtyard. Victoria froze, her gaze darting frantically between Preston and me. Preston took a step back, raising his hands in a desperate, defensive gesture. "Gregory, this is insane," he stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "You're having an episode. Your mind is going. Someone call Dr. Ellington immediately. He needs his medication." "Do not call the fake holistic doctor you hired to murder me," I commanded, my voice booming through the speakers, cutting through his pathetic lie like a scythe. I shifted my gaze to the shadows of the oak tree. "And don't expect Harper to give you digital rescue. Her real name is Alina. She is a convicted cyber fraudster who served 3 years in federal prison. More importantly, she is your legal wife." I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tuxedo jacket and pulled out the encrypted flash drive I had acquired from the Blacksite moving van. I held it up in the bright afternoon sun for all to see. "My mind is just fine, Preston. I have an incredibly meticulous investigative team. I possess the municipal marriage certificate from Nevada from 7 years ago with both your real names on it. I have the complete offshore financial routing protocols she just attempted to execute on that sleek silver tablet. And I have an incredibly detailed, precise toxicology report, breaking down the highly volatile synthetic cardiovascular inhibitor you have been feeding me every morning for the past month." Victoria let out a sharp, devastated sob, stumbling backward until her shoulders hit the wooden floral arch. She looked at Preston, her eyes begging him to deny these horrible accusations, begging him to tell her this was all paranoid delusion. But Preston could not speak. His jaw was tight, his breathing was shallow and erratic. He looked frantically toward the shadows, searching for his accomplice. Harper was no longer standing there with her tablet. She had tossed the device onto the grass and was sprinting desperately toward the heavy iron gates of the estate perimeter. She had realized the trap was triggered and was abandoning him to save herself. But Desmond was already there. 2 large, armed security contractors stepped out from behind stone pillars and immediately intercepted her, forcing her arms behind her back. "They weren't planning a wedding, Victoria," I said softly, turning to look at my heartbroken, weeping daughter. "They were planning a highly synchronized, ruthless execution. He is a reckless, desperate gambler who owes an international cartel $15 million. The money he intended to steal from our blind trust was the absolute, non-negotiable ransom he needed to buy his own life. The rest was their untraceable retirement fund. The software integration, the isolated venue, the signal jammers, all of it was a meticulously engineered heist. And the vintage Paul Roger waiting in the silver buckets was the high-acidity chemical catalyst meant to trigger the dormant poison in my heart, ensuring I dropped dead during the toast and left you a wealthy, easily manipulated widow." Preston finally cracked. The polished, mature veneer evaporated completely, leaving only a cornered, desperate beast. "You arrogant, pathetic old man," he spat, his voice trembling with pure, venomous hatred. "You think you won. You think you're so clever. The transfer protocols were fully automated. Alina triggered the bypass the moment the ceremony started. Your blind trust is empty. The offshore accounts are fully funded. Even if you lock me up, your precious business empire is bankrupt. You have nothing left." I looked at him with a deep, devastating pity. I lowered the microphone slowly, offering a chilling, ice-cold smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "You truly believe you were the smartest predator in the room, Preston," I replied calmly, ensuring only he and Victoria could hear my final, crushing revelation. "You never had the keys to my empire. The moment you requested administrative access to my servers, I built a flawless, totally isolated digital honeypot. Your clever wife didn't hack my discretionary trust. She hacked an empty, heavily monitored sandbox. Every dollar you attempted to steal was automatically routed to a secure holding account fully controlled by federal investigators. 72 hours ago, I personally transferred my true wealth into an impenetrable, biometrically protected offshore entity. The fortune you attempted to steal is perfectly safe. The poison you attempted to trigger has been completely neutralized by a heavy chemical blocker injected into my shoulder an hour ago. You stole absolutely nothing. You murdered absolutely no one, and your time has finally, irrevocably run out. Preston's knees went soft. The crushing weight of total defeat hit him like a physical blow. He collapsed onto the pristine white carpet of the altar, burying his face in his hands. In the distance, the approaching whine of sirens began to echo loudly through the Texas hills. The trap had closed perfectly. The ghosts were unmasked forever, and my daughter was finally, utterly free. But the intoxicating delusion of a desperate addict doesn't simply evaporate, even in the face of undeniable destruction. Preston suddenly lifted his head from his shaking hands, his dark eyes wide and unhinged. The crushing recognition of failure mutated into a frantic, chaotic, absolute denial. He scrambled up from the altar's white carpet, his custom tuxedo jacket now heavily wrinkled and disheveled. Chaos erupted across the vast courtyard in a fresh, terrifying wave. The wealthy guests who had been frozen in shock began to scream and scramble in genuine panic. Several titans of industry stood quickly, pulling their wives safely back from the center aisle. Victoria stood completely paralyzed, her delicate hands still trembling at her mouth. Her brain was struggling frantically, trying to process the rapid, violent collapse of her entire future. Preston's charming mask shattered into a million jagged pieces. He turned wildly toward the perimeter of the sprawling estate, where my private security contractors were holding his accomplice wife pinned against a solid stone pillar. He screamed desperately at Harper to initiate the transfer, his voice a primal, guttural roar that drowned out the approaching sirens. He commanded her with a frantic, breathless urgency, demanding she execute the final stage of their digital heist, regardless of the catastrophe unfolding around them. Driven by that same cornered desperation, Harper writhed violently under the firm control of the burly security guards. With a sudden, savage twist of her lithe body, she managed to wrench her right arm free, and in that fleeting instant, she lunged for the manicured grass where her sleek silver tablet had just fallen. Her manicured, slender fingers raced across the glowing glass screen. With a triumphant, breathless gasp, Harper pressed the button on the tablet, genuinely believing she had just succeeded in deploying her malicious parasite software directly into my corporate host. She lifted her head from the grass, a wild, triumphant smile flashing briefly across her pale face, expectant of the instantaneous digital confirmation of a $150 million wire transfer. She believed she had secured their final salvation. I stood high on the raised floral altar, gripping the heavy microphone in my right hand. I didn't flinch. I didn't move to stop her frantic action. Instead, I let out a low, booming sound. I laughed into the microphone. It was a cold, humorless sound that sliced through the rising panic in the courtyard like a sharp steel blade. The sound resonated widely through the professional sound system, forcing the whispering crowd into a sudden, profoundly uncomfortable silence. I looked directly at the man kneeling on the grass. "Go ahead, Harper," I said, my voice dripping with absolute, unshakable authority. "Take the $150 million. For one agonizing second, the warm Texas air became heavy and utterly still. Preston turned to look at me, his chest heaving beneath his ruined tuxedo. His desperate eyes searched mine, trying to find a massive bluff. He wanted so badly to believe that I was just a defeated old man making one last pathetic attempt to save face. But in my steady gaze, there was absolutely no trace of a bluff. Suddenly, Harper's device on the grass chimed. It wasn't a subtle ring. It was a loud, piercing, aggressive digital siren that shattered the quiet tension of the afternoon. Her tablet screen flashed a brilliant, blinding crimson, projecting a massive federal error code that completely disregarded their extensive criminal preparation. The digital parasite software hadn't breached a fragile, unprotected banking portal as they had intended. It had blindly charged directly into a heavily fortified, highly monitored federal intelligence trap. Harper stared at the flashing red screen in absolute horror, as security personnel quickly seized her arms again, dragging her roughly away from the device. The wild smile slid instantly from her face. The honeypot server had done its job perfectly, absorbing the malicious attack and instantly dismantling their grand financial plan. Preston watched the flickering red light reflect off the nearby marble steps. Under the weight of the undeniable reality, his psyche finally collapsed entirely. He let out a low, pathetic whimper, stumbling backward until he hit the edge of the wooden lectern. I reached into the inner pocket of my custom tuxedo jacket once more. I pulled out the toxicology report, the thick stack of undeniable paper evidence, detailing the precise molecular structure of the lethal cardiovascular inhibitor they had been methodically putting into my morning supplements for a month. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and slammed it into Preston's chest. The heavy papers slapped against his pristine white shirt. They scattered across the floral altar, falling to the marble floor like useless, withered leaves. "The transfer you just triggered didn't go to the Cayman Islands, Preston," I said, my voice projecting with lethal clarity through the professional speakers, ensuring every illustrious guest in the vast courtyard heard his final, inevitable conviction. "It went directly to the FBI, with your exact GPS coordinates attached, and locked in the network of your entire violent cartel organization." Preston stared down at the scattered toxicology reports, his breath catching in his throat as the heavy realization swept over his shattered brain. He hadn't just failed to rob my corporate empire. He had actively handed the federal government the ultimate, undeniable roadmap linking himself to the crime organization that wanted him dead. He was utterly finished, hopelessly trapped between a federal prison cell and the relentless vengeance of a violent cartel. I paused for a long, heavy moment, letting the absolute totality of his ruin settle onto his trembling shoulders. I shifted my gaze slowly to the elegant silver bucket sitting quietly at the edge of the altar. The lethal vintage champagne was still chilling in silence on the ice. I looked back at his terrified face. "By the way," I added, my tone dropping to a lethal, intensely conversational whisper, carrying a profound, undeniable sense of finality, "I prefer bourbon to your poisoned champagne." The wail of sirens, previously a faint echo in the distance, suddenly amplified into a deafening roar as a dozen marked federal vehicles slammed through the front iron gates of the sprawling estate. Red and blue lights flashed wildly against the ancient oaks, washing the terrified faces of the wedding guests in a chaotic, spinning spectrum of brilliant colors. Heavily armed federal agents poured from the vehicles, moving across the manicured grass with blistering tactical precision. They bypassed the stunned crowd entirely, marching directly toward the altar. Two grim-faced agents grabbed Preston by both arms, jerking him upright and snapping heavy steel cuffs firmly around his wrists with a sharp, metallic click. He didn't resist. He simply bowed his head, a completely broken, defeated shell of a man. Across the courtyard, more agents detained Harper, marching her toward a waiting transport van. The grand, lethal illusion was over. I set the heavy microphone on the wooden lectern and left them behind forever. but walking away was a luxury I could not yet afford. The dull thud of my polished leather shoes against the marble steps was instantly swallowed by the absolutely deafening, chaotic explosion that erupted behind me. I stopped at the base of the altar and turned slowly, watching the final violent act of this tragedy unfold. The heavy oak doors of the venue weren't just opened. They were smashed apart by the pure force of a federal raid. Dozens of highly trained agents, their tactical gear a stark contrast to the delicate white roses and draped silk, swarmed the elevated platform completely. Mitchell walked through the center of the frantic courtyard with a clear objective, clutching a heavy leather briefcase containing undeniable legal search warrants. He pointed directly toward the altar, coordinating the strike team with the calm, ruthless efficiency of a seasoned prosecutor. The wealthy, powerful guests of the Texas elite were frantically scrambling to both sides, knocking over crystal flutes and silver trays in a panicked rush to flee the tactical perimeter. Within seconds, the perfect, lavish wedding was completely reduced to a chaotic, spinning crime scene. Preston, realizing the absolute totality of his doom, suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed trance. Distracted federal agents let go for a split second. With a sudden, explosive burst of pure, cornered adrenaline, Preston twisted violently back on his right shoulder. He didn't go for the blocked main entrance. Instead, he bolted toward a narrow stone path that led to a dense, meticulously manicured garden at the rear of the sprawling estate. His tuxedo jacket gave a loud, ripping sound as he surged across the pristine white carpet. He looked like a cornered beast, entirely stripped of his sophisticated charm and arrogant confidence. But he had fundamentally miscalculated the meticulous preparation of my security team. Desmond hadn't just been watching from the shadows. He had anticipated this flight response long ago. Before Preston even reached the edge of the garden path, Desmond struck with a terrifying, lethal speed. He intercepted the fleeing groom with a brutal, uncompromising tackle. The sound of Desmond impacting Preston, a heavy, visceral thud, echoed loudly throughout the courtyard. They rolled violently into an intricate display of imported orchids, smashing expensive ceramic vases into thousands of jagged shards. Desmond pinned Preston face first into the wet soil in seconds, driving his heavy knee directly into the broken groom's spine. Preston struggled frantically, screaming desperate, incoherent profanities into the ruined flowers, but he was utterly subdued. The charming fiancée was gone, replaced by a pathetic criminal whose borrowed time had finally run out. Across the broken altar, the situation with Harper was equally devastating. She was no longer the composed, invisible event coordinator blending into the elegant backdrop. She was fighting the federal agents with wild desperation, like a cornered predator. As the steel handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, she began to scream in absolute panic. Her voice was sharp and piercing, stripping away every layer of the carefully constructed corporate identity she had forged. She screamed at the agents, demanding to see a lawyer, threatening ridiculous legal action, and frantically cursing Preston's massive failure. Her charcoal dress was torn and stained. Her hair hung in disarray over her frantic face. Mitchell walked calmly up to her, holding a printed federal indictment. He read her real name aloud, ensuring the entire courtyard heard the undeniable confirmation of her criminal history. She lunged in his direction and spat at him, the final display of venom she had to offer. Agents secured her arms firmly, roughly escorting her down the center aisle, parading her past the terrified corporate titans she had attempted to steal from. Her screams faded as they forced her into the back of a heavy armored transport vehicle and slammed the steel doors shut, sealing away her fraudulent existence. In the spinning, violent chaos of the federal raid, my gaze found the only person who truly mattered. Victoria was standing completely rigid near the center of the ruined altar. The sun still shone on the woven crystals of her ivory gown, but that radiant purity was gone. Her face was deathly pale, completely drained of life. Her wide, unblinking eyes stared at the process of the man she had sworn to love, forever being dragged away, muddy and brutalized. She watched him being taken, realizing in this moment in real time that his every kiss, every gentle touch, every soft promise of a beautiful future had been a calculated, sociopathic lie. The psychological blow was absolute and entirely overwhelming. The illusion had torn through her reality with such violence that her body couldn't bear the crushing weight. Beneath the heavy silk of her wedding dress, her knees gave out. She let out a gasping sound, a sound of devastating heartbreak that pierced through the dull ache of the chemical blockers pulsing in my veins. Victoria collapsed onto the white carpet, her delicate hands clutching her chest as if trying to piece together her shattered heart. I moved instantly, bridging the distance between the wooden bench and the floral altar. I knelt heavily onto the ruined carpet, entirely ignoring the radiating pain from my injected shoulder. I wrapped my arms around my trembling daughter, pulling her fragile, shaking body tightly against my chest. She buried her face into the fabric of my custom tuxedo and broke down completely, releasing primal, uncontrollable sobs. Her tears soaked my shirt rapidly, burning against my skin. She gripped my shoulders with the white-knuckled desperation of someone anchoring themselves to the only real, solid truth in her completely destroyed world. I held her as tightly as any human could, resting my chin on her soft head, gently rocking her back and forth amidst the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles. Watching her beautiful heart break into a million irreparable pieces was unbelievably, profoundly painful. I had spent a lifetime building an empire specifically to protect her from the harsh, cruel realities of this world. And yet, I had become the one to deliver the most devastating blow she had ever experienced. But as I held my weeping daughter on the ruined wedding floor, I knew with absolute, uncompromising certainty that my brutal actions were entirely justified. I hadn't ruined her life. I had saved it. Preston and Harper were a lethal infection, burrowing deep into the very core of my family. They were poisoning the host in silence, preparing to consume everything we held dear. You cannot negotiate with a parasite. You cannot reason with a terminal illness. You must take the sharp, unmerciful blade and sever the infected limb completely before the rot reaches the heart. This surgical amputation was bloody, terrifying, and deeply painful, but it was the only absolute way to ensure the patient would survive. I kissed Victoria's head softly, whispering that she was safe, that I was here, and that no one could ever hurt her again. She was finally free, and together we would rebuild our lives. 6 months have passed since that harrowing afternoon in Austin. The changing of the seasons has brought a much-needed tranquility to our lives, clearing away the ashes of that ruined wedding and replacing overwhelming chaos with absolute, undeniable clarity. I sit opposite Victoria at the massive mahogany table in the boardroom at corporate headquarters. The expansive glass windows offer a panoramic view of the Dallas skyline, a kingdom that remains absolutely secure under my command. The girl who once sobbed in a ruined ivory gown, radiant yet heartbreakingly naive, is gone. She has been completely replaced by a sharp, hypervigilant executive. Her long, flowing hair has been cut into a crisp, professional style. She wears a tailored dark suit, her posture is impeccable, and her eyes are scanning a complex quarterly financial report with a predatory focus that fills me with immense, unshakable pride. The devastating trauma of that betrayal did not break her spirit. It forged her into unbreakable steel. She learned the hardest lesson our world has to offer in the most brutal way imaginable, but she emerged from the fire with her eyes wide open, ready to inherit this empire. She no longer accepts simple answers. She questions every motive with a brilliant, calculating skepticism. It is a necessary evolution, a powerful shield that will ensure she never falls victim to another controlling parasite. Meanwhile, Preston is experiencing a vastly different reality. His meticulously crafted illusion of charm has evaporated entirely, leaving him to face the dark, inescapable consequences of his insatiable greed. He is currently rotting in a maximum security federal prison, serving a lengthy sentence for wire fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. But the high walls of federal prison offer him no true sanctuary. He lives every day in absolute, suffocating terror, because the international cartel he failed to pay knows exactly where he is. The digital trap I set didn't just secure my wealth, it exposed their entire financial routing network to the authorities, costing them millions. Preston is a marked man, always looking over his shoulder in the exercise yard, jumping at every shadow and waking up in cold sweats. His grifter wife, Alina, is locked away in a separate federal facility, completely cut off from the elaborate scams she once used to manipulate innocent lives. They gambled their freedom on my death, and they lost absolutely everything. The physical toll from the heavy chemical neutralizer Dr. Linwood injected into my shoulder faded over the weeks that followed. The horrific synthetic poison Preston fed me was purged from my system entirely, and my cardiovascular health is stronger than it has ever been. The board members who had briefly viewed me as a frail, dying patriarch on that white carpet now look at me with a profound, terrifying respect. They witnessed exactly how ruthless I can be when my family and my legacy are actively threatened. There are no more whispered conversations about my impending succession or my failing health. The apex predator never left the building. I am fully restored, leading my enterprise with an iron grip that no one dares to challenge. I look across the polished conference table and slide a new, highly confidential acquisition file toward Victoria. She picks up her gold pen and reviews the complex data with an analyst's precision. We no longer speak of Preston or that ruined wedding. That dark chapter has been closed permanently, archived as a brutal, necessary educational experience. We are focused entirely on the future, on expanding this massive, impenetrable fortress we have built together. The lethal trap that was laid for me became the exact mechanism that secured our absolute sovereignty. I survived the poison, dismantled the grand illusion, and protected the only people who truly matter. I remain firmly seated on my throne, unscathed, watching my daughter prepare to conquer the world. Money can buy a custom tuxedo and fund a perfect smile, but it can never truly mask a rotting heart. You must never let the comforting illusion of family blind your natural instincts. If your gut tells you something is wrong, trust it, verify it, and act without mercy. Forgiveness is a luxury reserved for those who make honest mistakes, not for those who meticulously plot your destruction. It is better to shatter the heart of a loved one today with an ugly truth than to have them buried tomorrow by a beautiful lie. Protect your bloodline and your mind. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs a reminder to stay vigilant. Leave a comment below. Have you ever discovered a traitor hidden in plain sight? Stay sharp, trust your gut, and I'll see you next time.